am I clear on what to do, but unable to execute? When that's happening, there's probably some sort of weight or something that is weighing you down or holding you back that needs to be attended to. That's not a point of shame. That doesn't say you're not going to continue to do great things or that what you've done so far isn't meaningful. That can be very startling and very unsettling for a CEO who has a history of achievement and who has been able to be successful by doing, by leaning in, by grinding harder, and yet they're stuck and they're unable to execute. And that is a great point for an individual and even that individual and their coach to reflect on what might be going on there. Is there something that is so weighing you down that you're just having a hard time getting past it? It might also be that there are old patterns that just keep hijacking your present decisions. And we know that life has a series of ups and downs and loops with it. So sometimes old patterns just have a way of rearing their ugly heads when we don't want them in our lives, but they come back. And so thinking about those patterns and how that's interfering with decisions also may result in someone seeking the couch beyond just the coach.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. We are back here with our episode of CardCast, and it's a very special episode indeed. This is the first time when we will not be shuffling cards because we are blessed with the presence of our first esteemed guest, Dr. Pamela Carrington Rotto. She's the person who, to a large degree, inspired the card coach or a couch, and therefore we'll be talking about that one. We won't pretend to be shuffling. Just basically say this is what we're gonna do, and off it goes.
So welcome, Pamela. It's great to have you on the podcast as our first guest, and a different format this time, long form rather than short form. So Pamela, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to your current situation as being a coach and a psychologist.
Thank you, Jed. I'm really glad to be here with both you and Milan. My background sits in two worlds, as you're mentioning, and those are two worlds that don't always talk very well to each other. So I am a licensed psychologist by training and practice, and yet over the past several years, I've worked primarily as a coach to CEOs and executive teams in companies that are growing or scaling. And before coaching full-time, I also served as a COO. So I've experienced leadership from the inside, not just as an observer. And what drew me to working with leaders is that leadership has a way of amplifying whatever we're carrying. I've seen incredibly capable, high-integrity CEOs who stall, not because they lack strategy or discipline, but just because they have unprocessed weight underneath the surface. And so I've had the opportunity to sit in both chairs, you could say, as a psychologist and as a coach. And it's given me a deep respect for what each discipline does well and for the importance of knowing when forward momentum is the right lever and when something needs to be unpacked first. And so that tension is what I'm really excited for us to explore together today.
That should set us up for a great conversation today. I'm looking forward to this chat.
So let's start. We had a conversation last summer, if I remember correctly. And, I came to you and say, how do we know? Because, as coaches, we often run into a situation where, am I getting out of my depth here a little bit? This is hard field. We don't want to cause any damage, and it would be so easily. So what would be your advice? What would you tell us and say, hey, if you hear that, you should probably step back and suggest that maybe the couch is what the client needs rather than the coaching approach.
Right. Well, I remember that conversation well. And you had asked me the same question. And my response to you was, it's all in the tense. And as you mentioned, that's what really kind of brought us to where we are today. So the question maybe is, what did I mean by that? And when we are operating as coaches, we are very future focused with our clients. So we're thinking about, where do you want to go, and where are you now, and what's the distance between? And we're looking at goals and the path and accountability. So we could think about that as forward momentum, if you will. In contrast, sometimes CEOs, leaders, others have things that are weighing them down, things that they need to unpack first. And so when I said it's all in the tense, it's because coaching is future focused, and therapy in large part is current to past focus. It's, what are you carrying? What do we need to unpack? What do we need to process? What can we free you from? And so when I mentioned with coaching forward momentum, we could partner that with therapy, removing the weight. And so thinking about that, I think maybe the anchoring line that people could think about is, when we start losing forward momentum as coaches, we start listening for tense. And that can give us some hints about how to support our clients best.
No, it makes a lot of sense to me. As you're speaking, the thought of, really, as a coaches, we're figuring out what to do and what not to do. We're changing behavior, installing new habits. What we are dealing with, what you're talking about, is baggage that people come that with that is preventing them from doing so, right? And I like your wording. We need to free them from that, so we can regain that forward momentum. Jet, maybe what is your experience here?
I love that distinction. I think that's such a simple analogy, and it's really easy to get to grips with, to get your head around. And when you said it's all in the tense, that was like a yes, and and it's one of those. I mean, psychology is incredibly complex, and I'm not a psychologist, so I can't really talk about it in any depth at all.
Well, that's why Pamela's here, right?
Well, indeed, absolutely.
but
but as coaches, we have to be able to understand when we're getting to that line, when we're getting to the point where we're no longer equipped to deal with that problem, and just expressing it in that very simple way, future or past, present, that just gives us a really easy observation point to say, okay, I need to make some phone calls. I need to connect this person with a professional that can help them, because this is a difficult area, and I've certainly experienced this with some of my clients. I had one client who, I won't go into the situation, but something had happened within his leadership team. He just could not get past it. He could not get past it, and that was having a material impact on his ability to operate as a good chief executive officer. At some point, I sort of said to him, look, we're now going beyond the CEO-coach relationship. I can't help you with this issue, but what I can do is I can put you in touch with someone who can. So I made a couple of connections. They ended up seeing a psychologist. They had a few sessions. And at the end of that, they came back and they'd managed to cut the baggage loose. They'd managed to let go of the load. And it was actually a surprisingly quick process, and that was just forgotten, and we moved on. But not everyone's open to that. Not every CEO is open to that, and I'm sure we're going to come to that as we talk through this today. But it's a difficult line to spot. But your model makes it a lot easier. But even so, not everyone is open to it when the time comes.
What I was thinking about, Judd, as you were talking, is the extent to which, as coaches, we typically work with very high-performing leaders. Wouldn't you both agree? So they're CEOs, they are executive team members. They've done a lot of things. They've achieved much. And so the misnomer there is that people need therapy because they're failing. And that's not true. With high-performing leaders, oftentimes they need therapy because they're functional. not because they're failing. They've learned to cope well. They've learned to move past things. And as you reach higher levels of leadership, your company is growing, the demands are greater, coping stops being enough. And so probably in the situation, Jed, that you mentioned, for that leader, that situation was almost like the straw, right? That made all the difference when coping just stopped being enough. And so as leaders, as coaches even, because this applies to us as well, we can find ourselves in situations where our emotional reaction is out of proportion to the situation. That's a red flag. That's a stop and pause. Let's figure out where this needs to go kind of flag. We can find ourselves in situations where we can't stop thinking about that situation, our response to the situation, choices that we made, maybe perhaps even regret. And it becomes that, to quote old times when we had records that scratched, it becomes the scratch in the record where the message repeats itself over and over again. And so if we look at it from that lens, then coaching stalls when the person's capacity is the constraint, because they just become so functional and they're coping through really tough situations and getting stuck or becoming circular, if that makes sense.
So you mentioned becoming overly emotional as a red flag, but that's probably not the only thing that people should look out for. So what are the other signs? What are the other triggers that you commonly see that we should sort of look out for and say, okay, there's something happening here?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned two, so that was one of them, and the other is persistent. We might call it rumination, so like repeated thoughts,
Okay, yep.
shame, self-blame. That would be a second category. Times when there's repetition without movement. So we keep circling back to that same place without moving forward. Maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's a decision. Difficulty making decisions can also be one of those flags that says maybe there's, fear and anxiety at a level that it's just difficult to push the go button. And another could be that the individual's strategy, because we all have strategy, right? We have coping strategies. We have other kinds of strategies that help us with life. That strategy keeps changing, but you see the same pattern of behavior, or you're hearing the same words again and again. And so the pattern isn't changing, even though the individual is trying some different things. That can be another sign.
I don't know if it's because because of my own history, if I'm particularly attuned to it, but I run into conflict avoidance quite often as an issue, even in high performing individuals. What's your take on that? Because how did you get where you are with the problem?
Right. That's a tough one, isn't it? Because it's incongruent, perhaps, with your history or how you even self. And so I think it ties to a question that CEOs can talk about with their coaches, and even just reflect on themselves. Am I clear on what to do, but unable to execute? When that's happening, there's probably some sort of weight or something that is weighing you down or holding you back that needs to be attended to. And that's not a point of shame. That doesn't say you're not going to continue to do great things or that what you've done so far isn't meaningful. So the CEO is at a point in time when they are struggling to execute, even though they're clear on what needs to be done. And that can be very startling and very unsettling for a CEO who has a history of achievement and who has been able to be successful by leaning in, by grinding harder. And yet they're stuck and they're unable to execute. And that is a great point for an individual and even that individual and their coach to reflect on what might be going on there. Is there something that is so weighing you down that you're just having a hard time getting past it? It might also be that there are old patterns that just keep hijacking your present decisions. And we know that life has a series of ups and downs and loops with it. So sometimes old patterns just have a way of rearing their ugly heads when we don't want them in our lives, but they come back. And so thinking about those patterns and how that's interfering with decisions also may result in someone seeking the couch beyond just the coach.
Now, all of the things you've described there, I mean, they're often things that CEOs just do. You know, they're often, you know, not making decisions, procrastinating, you know, second guessing, and that's not necessarily a sign that they need, you know, professional help. So it's really difficult to identify, you know, what, bearing in mind these flags, you know, what puts it in the you need help to that's just you having a bad day, you know, having a bad few days, few weeks. You know, so it's really hard to spot. You know, that's what I've struggled with in the past, because sometimes, you know, CEOs just they don't really want to make that decision. They don't need to, but they don't. Doesn't mean they need help. So it's a really hard situation to really identify and diagnose. So, you know, that's, I guess that's not a question there. It's just it just shows that what we do is difficult, hard, and I know you don't want to call in the psychologist when it's not necessary.
Oh,
Well,
I disagree with that.
I thought Milan might have something to say about that.
No, because you know, we were talking about like telling somebody that they need therapy used to be like, you know, equivalent to you're crazy, what's wrong with you, right? But that's not what it is. I really think that, especially if you're at that stress, like it's like oil change for your brain. It's just a maintenance there, because there is always something, right? We are having two conversations here, right? One is about how we spotted that there is something that needs handling, but then the second piece is the value of therapy itself for the CEO, regardless of whether anything, you know, popped out its ugly head or not, right? Because I really think that, I don't say this is one of my first questions, but as soon as there is some trust, you know, established with the CEO, me asking whether they do have a therapist or not that they're regularly seeing is just standard question, so I know where they're at, whether they have that support, whether there is the team. You know, we talked about this a lot, Jed, in the Loneliness of CEO episode, right? And
Yeah.
That I do believe that having a therapist is as important as you know, having a coach or having a mentor or having somebody, like, you know, it's a part of the support team for somebody who cannot do it alone, even though they are under the impression that they should. So yeah, that was my reaction there. Sorry about it.
No, I think that's entirely valid, and I love that perspective. And there are two things that's jumping to my mind right now. Is, you know, first of all, you know, has the stigma of support, help, therapy changed over the years? And it probably has, and we'll probably spend some time talking about that in a moment. But I'm also thinking there's maybe some geographical differences here, and that maybe in
cultural
the US, maybe in
differences,
Canada.
for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. You know, where therapy is just seen as a norm. And in Australia, I mean, there's a lot less stigma attached now than there used to be. That's, you know, that's understood, but it's also probably not as common. It's probably not as common. Doesn't mean that it's seen as you're crazy and you know what's wrong with him. But it's probably not as common as it is in North America.
Yeah, if you put Europe into it, if I can bring that lens, being from there, you're absolutely right. Right? Again, it's getting better. It's getting much better, and to some degree, I think that COVID helped. Because, you know, so many people did realize that, hey, a lot of the things we were dealing with, we can't cope anymore, and this is actually a way out. But then there is the other problem, and there's actually accessibility of that service and its quality, because the stigma effectively reduced the demand for those services. Therefore, you didn't have as many practitioners who would who would have the experience required when suddenly when the need spikes or the stigma gets removed, to get access to that service is actually not easy.
Yeah. So Pamela, you've been in this industry for years and years and years. Have you seen a shift? Have you seen a change in the last 10, 15 years?
Oh, most definitely. There has definitely been a significant shift. And there's even a generational shift as well.
Oh, good.
And so that is very promising, because I think that, there has been a misperception about therapy. Therapy is for people who are weak in their mind, or people who don't have the willpower to just move beyond. And there's much more realization now that we're living these lives and a lot of things happen along the way. And some of them we probably work through in a healthy manner during that time, and other things just aren't, for a lot of different reasons. And so when we think about therapy and its role, it's increasing a person's capacity. So coaching directs that capacity, right? But therapy increases capacity. And
Okay.
it helps remove the weight, right? So that you can run.
I actually had a conversation with a colleague yesterday, and we came up with the word ballpacity, which is having capacity and the balls to do something. But I wanted to dig into one more thing, because I would really love your advice on this, because I ran into it in several cases. And that's people-pleasing tendencies, and the way that can completely stop somebody's capacity to act on a decision, even when they know that they're really wrong, because they're afraid of hurting somebody. They're afraid of not doing the right thing. And Jed and I talk about this a little bit in some of the A-player episodes, and definitely in the lovable losers one, because that's one of the issue when somebody's great and they have they live and breathe the company values, but they just shouldn't be there, and that's very difficult for the CEO to do something about that. And if they have a people-pleasing tendencies, then it gets really, really hard. They've been here for 15 years, but that doesn't mean they're actually doing anything. Anyway, do you run into that often as well, or is it just my bubble for some reason?
I think that, I've seen what you're talking about. I don't know that I see that more frequently than a lot of other kinds of situations. And some of what I think we could look at in that is the impact of that people-pleasing behavior, right? And the frequency and strength of that behavior. And so if it is so frequent and so strong that it becomes kind of the way that person deals with everything, then, probably one of my questions is, do you need skill building in other areas so that you can respond differently? Or is this something that's holding you back because you have a weight or a heaviness or something that you need to work through? That helps you understand within yourself that always pleasing people isn't healthy. And so when we look at any of this space, really understanding the impact to that person, to the people they work with, to the people that they live with and love, and the communities that they belong to, if it is dysfunctional, because it's reached a level where it's too strong, too frequent, it's like a one channel situation, then we need to step back and look at that. So, and I think that really gets to the issue that sometimes with therapy, even now, even though we've come a real long way, sometimes people think in their minds, well, therapy is for crisis only, and I'm not in crisis.
No, it isn't.
Right? And we don't want to get to crisis. Like therapy pre-crisis is a good thing.
It's like saying that exercise is only for obese people. It's ridiculous.
Right. But that, it's the stories we tell ourselves, right? It's the stories we tell ourselves. We tell ourselves things like, if I were stronger, I wouldn't need it. We tell ourselves things like, it means I failed as a leader. As a coach, we could say the same thing. It means I failed as a coach, right? Because as coaches, we have to be open to therapy as well. And here's the big one. This is what I hear a lot. I don't have time. And
we hear that a lot from CEOs about many things, don't we?
Exactly.
We do.
Yes.
We do. That's probably the biggest objection. I just don't have the time. And I don't know how you guys respond to that. My response is typically something like, if you don't have time for therapy, you certainly don't have time to stay stuck.
That's
and kind of let them think about that.
So Pamela, I had a question around how you balance, your role as a coach with your obviously expertise as a registered licensed psychologist, because they're very different things. So when you're working with a client in a coaching situation, is the therapy off limits, or do you have a distinct point where you sort of pull a different hat out and put that on? How do you balance that within your coaching practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would begin by saying, just because you have the tools doesn't mean you need to use them in every situation. And so when I engage with clients as a coach, it is as a coach. That's the hat I'm wearing. And oftentimes we'll have a conversation. I studied, brain behavior connections, and I got deep into studying people. And so I'm going to bring that to the table, but I'm not going to put on my therapy hat. I have a, circle of influence that allows me to connect people with therapists when the time is appropriate. And I would encourage that for all coaches. We think about all the other circle of influence that we build out and that we have in communities. And therapists are a really important part of that, because there's a lot of different approaches to therapy. And I think that just as with coaching, probably the single most important predictor of success is the match between the coach and the client. The same is true of the client and the therapist. It needs to be the right match for them and for their needs. And then, like you said, Jed, in the example you gave earlier, it doesn't necessarily need to be long-term. And so that match is really important, because it can really help free that individual up to dive in and be ready for the next level of growth, the next level of leadership capacity, whatever that next is for them.
Do you have a magic wand for this particular problem? Because I've run into this before, and that is, I tried therapy, it didn't work, I just didn't connect. I'm not good, right? It takes emotional toll, it takes energy to get started with therapy, because it requires a level of vulnerability that that individual might not be used to. And we know that if they don't get lucky, and most of the time you don't, the first therapy is not necessarily the right one, the right modality, the right personality, whatever that is. Having to go through that again and again, through that. Sometimes it takes 3-4 tries before you find somebody you click with. What would you, besides patience and perseverance and belief in miracle, what would you recommend to somebody who might be in that position, or what would you recommend me to tell them? How can I encourage them not to give up on therapy?
It's really interesting, because if you think about the service providers that we and our CEO clients surround ourselves with, not everyone goes right in the first try, right? We may change bankers. We may change, any number of service providers. And yet what's interesting, or maybe fascinating, is that oftentimes we get it in our heads that we're going to choose this one therapist, and if it's not right, no therapist is right. So we're willing to tolerate and, look at different doctors, right? I need a second opinion, or I just don't feel like I have the connection that I need with this doctor. I'm going to seek other help. And so therapists are no different. And some of what could be helpful is for a coach to talk to their client about their thought process or their selection process in choosing a coach. What were the kinds of things that were important to them? Were there any deal breakers with that? Now, a therapist is different. The list is probably going to be different, but there may be a few items that are on both lists. So what is that list of, nice to have, need to have, and quote, deal breakers for looking for therapists and connecting with a therapist?
Mm-hmm. Is there a way we can, and for lack of better word, don't take it to verbally diagnose, is to figure out from the conversation we have with a coaching client, like potentially what type of therapy would be the right one for them to sort of increase the chances that they're going to hit it well the first time if we're introducing them to somebody, right? After some time, we do have maybe a feeling for it just from experience, but are there any particular hints that we can look at and say, oh, maybe, this would be a CBT department, or you need to look at somebody who has adult attachment style experience, or whatever that is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Any tips?
The biggest tip that I would give on that is to use AI, because you can describe things that you're looking for and AI can point you in a direction. Now, there's a caveat to that. Do not use AI as your therapist.
Yes, please not.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Okay.
But
that's good advice.
That's really accessible to people, and it can help you become aware of, types of therapy that you don't even know exist. And then experience. Also, if you know people who have had therapists, especially people in high level positions in companies, those kinds of things, I know there's often no vulnerability around that, but sometimes in peer groups, there is vulnerability around that, and you can ask others in your peer group.
I'd like to bring it back to the card, if I could, just for a moment, because the card is called Coach or Couch. Would a better name have been Coach and Couch?
Well, I think that the card is making the point, right? But yes.
Because it's not about the or, is it? That's something I've learned through this conversation. It's not about the or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is not about the or. Therapy can serve as preventive leadership maintenance, if you really think about it. And I think that's the miss. I'm glad you brought that up, Jed, because it doesn't need to be to the point where there are red flags, right? Or things are impacting our quality of life or the quality of person that we show up as in our personal situations or our work situations. So therapy can absolutely be preventative leadership maintenance.
Again, it's like exercise. It's like going to the gym for your brain, right? So to make sure that you are strong, you're resilient, and you can withstand the challenge, mental or physical, when it comes, right? And you can only do it by preparing yourself, by doing it when you don't necessarily feel you need it, right? You prevent injury by exercising before you get injured.
Right. Well, and we could step back and say, so what does it look like when a CEO client has both? And I don't know about each of your experience. I notice that with some of my clients who have both, coaching moves faster and decisions feel less charged, right? There's less emotional charge. What else do I notice? I notice fewer derailments where you just, it's going off the rails. We're not processing the feelings of situations. It even shows up in productive conflict. With both, I think that CEOs and other individuals as well are better able to engage in productive conflict around the issues without making it or taking it personally.
Yeah. Milan, you mentioned preventive as a term just a moment ago, and when you said that, I was drawn back to Kevin Lawrence's book, Your Oxygen Mask First. And it's a book specifically written for CEOs, and it's a book full of preventive tools that help CEOs get to the point where that maybe their psychological state is actually impacting their work and their life, work and life. And that's a really good resource for CEOs if they sort of they just want to keep the maintenance going, and work through and identify something that is maybe holding them back. Are you familiar with that book, Pamela?
I am. And in fact, Jed, I'm really glad you brought that up. I was on a plane last night flying back home. And, one of the things that struck me is that when we're on a plane, every single time we fly, they go through a routine that instructs us on where the oxygen mask is located. It's not just use your oxygen mask first so that you can help others. It's we're going to show you where that oxygen mask is located. And chances are the vast percentage of people on that plane absolutely know that oxygen mask is going to drop from above. And yet they remind us. And so I was thinking about that in terms of knowing where your resources are located ahead of time. Where is your oxygen mask? What is your oxygen mask? Where can you find it? So that when you're in a situation or coming up to a situation and you need it, you know exactly where to locate it.
Because you can't help anyone else unless you've looked after yourself first.
No, absolutely true.
Well, thank you very much. I have like 17 different questions in my mind, so maybe we'll need to do a follow-up episode one day. But this has been great, and if I were to summarize, ignore the stigma if it's around you. Therapy is a preventive measure, so you can fully show up when the crisis comes, which in the life of CEOs they will, one day or the other. And yes, if you are carrying some baggage that is making it difficult for you to act or to make the right decisions or to enjoy what you're doing, for crying out loud, that might be the trigger to go back and see, okay, maybe that there is a need for professional help with this, and it will just make everything lighter. And as you're saying, you get a better return on investment on your coaching money too, because you'll be proceeding faster, which is very, very nice touch that I wasn't thinking about. So thank you very much for that, Jim. And thank you so much again for joining us today as our first guest. It was absolutely fantastic. Jed, anything to add before we wrap up?
No, that was a great conversation, and I learned some things. And you know me, I'm a learner, so I'm always happy when I learn something new.